Mohsen, thank you for having us here today. It's great to finally sit with you here after you were released from ICE detention. We were actually trying to coordinate this interview for a while, and we spoke on the phone the night before your citizenship interview, which you went to, and the whole world witnessed your detention there by ICE agents. And now we're sitting here today, so there's a lot to get through to, but can you describe to us what happened that day on your way to the citizenship interview?
Well, thank you for making the trip all the way to Vermont to interview me. And it's a pleasure to finally make this interview. That day when I was detained, I went into USCIS office, the immigration office, on the hope to receive my citizenship, something I have applied for about a year prior to that appointment, and it was actually delayed according to the schedule. So I thought that I may get actually my citizenship. I wanted to become a citizen of this country, of the United States, because I appreciated, and I still do appreciate, the principles and the values that this country is based on, the Constitution, and it's the promise for what it could be, like Martin Luther King has said. But the outcome, as expected, was I was detained after doing my interview, taken, handcuffed out of the office and into an unmarked SUV into detention.
Mm-hmm. And prior to the detention, you had left New York, where you studied at Columbia, and you were sort of in hiding in Vermont, right? Can you describe why you had to do that?
Yes, before hiding in Vermont, or sheltering in place, as I like to say it, I've actually sheltered in place in New York City for 23 days. And the reason I did that, there were two reasons. The first one, there was a campaign, a deportation campaign, launched by extreme groups that are supporting the genocide, the war against my people. And they wanted me to be deported. And that was late January. And the second one that raised a very serious flag is the detention of students, as we have seen Mahmoud Khalil, who was detained from his Columbia residential, actually, and Rumeysa Ozturk, who was also detained while she is going to an iftar during Ramadan. So when I saw what happened with Mahmoud, I decided it's no longer safe here, and most likely the next person could be me. So I sheltered in place for 23 days, and during that period, in the middle of it, I received this the notice that says you have been scheduled for an interview on April 14th.
So that must have been, well, so much must have been going through your head. In one way, it's exciting because finally the citizenship interview you've been waiting for is about to take place. But also, all this talk about deportations is happening. Mahmoud Khalil has been taken to Louisiana. So what were you thinking at that point? What was going through your head? Did you think that it might be a trap, the citizenship interview?
That's actually the first intuition that I had. I was torn between the feelings of like, yes, finally the interview is here, and the feeling that is saying to me, wait a minute, this actually might be a trap. So, and as you might expect, the outcome is either I would become a citizen with full rights or to be detained with no rights. And the second outcome, unfortunately, is what unfolded.
Mm-hmm. And then can you describe what happened after? When you were detained, there was a fear that you were going to be taken to Louisiana, where Mahmoud Khalil is. And from my understanding, that you just very narrowly managed to stay here in Vermont, which led to the conditions of your eventual release.
Correct. So this is a premeditated plan that the DHS had in mind. They were planning on detaining me. They allowed me to finish my interview, to complete it. And they asked me if I would be willing to take the Pledge of Allegiance before they detained me. And I signed a document saying that I'm willing to protect and to defend the Constitution of this country. And after that, shortly, I get handcuffed and detained. Their plan was to actually transfer me outside of Vermont, directly to Louisiana. And the reason, because there, it's a different jurisdiction. I would be basically facing the immigration system in Louisiana that we have seen has not been just to the students who were detained. But I was blessed, if one might say, or lucky, because my legal team was prepared. They already drafted the orders or the petitions to stop ICE or the Department of Homeland Security from transferring me. But that wasn't it, because directly after I get detained and processed, that's within an hour and a half, the plan that they had in mind is to put me on an airplane. So they take me to Burlington Airport. Two agents are there waiting for me to put me on the airplane. We enter the airport and we miss the flight by a few minutes, which changed, the whole legal battle. And that is the reason why I was the first to be released among other students who were detained. And that started the dominoes effect, if one might say.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's just crazy to consider, like the couple minutes where the things that started the dominoes that got us here to this point and got you free. And can you tell us what happened during your detention? How were the conditions then? Did you feel the support that was gathering outside for you while you were in there, and what was going through your head?
This is a good question to ask, because as I mentioned, other students did not have this opportunity. The opportunity to stay close to their community, because they were shipped into nowhere in Louisiana. They can't access their community or even legal support. It's difficult to get there. It's in isolation. But in my case, it allowed my community in Vermont, and I've been here for 10 years. My roots are here. I belong to this community. This is a place that I call home, where I feel safe and loved by the people. And the people have shown up, and they have marched in the streets. They have written to our representatives. They have shared their voice, spoke with the media. So this is one thing. Mm-hmm. The other thing, in Vermont, I was also under the state, basically detention center, or in a prison that belongs to the state. The conditions are not very good conditions, of course, but as I have learned, they are better than the conditions which basically other students have faced in Louisiana. So, for example, I had the opportunity to have visitors on weekends. They did not. I had the opportunity to see my community coming and protesting outside the prison. They did not. I had the opportunity to receive support from my representatives, the two senators and the congresswoman who I am very grateful for, and other people as well. They did not. This is on one hand. On the other hand, you see the system of punitive, I would say, and punishment in prison, where actually it's not very humane conditions. And you feel the pain and you feel the suffering of others, whether if they are detained or imprisoned for crimes that they may have committed, or migrant workers who are here in Vermont and who basically work on farms, plant and harvest the delicious organic food that Vermont has, or work on dairy farms. So you feel the pain and you see the interconnectedness of the injustice that people face in different situations.
Mm-hmm. Definitely a lot to think about there. And you mentioned the support that Vermont gave you, the people in Vermont, the representatives, the Congress people, the senators, most famously Bernie Sanders was supporting you and campaigning for your release. And the support even went beyond Vermont. In New York, for example, where you studied at Columbia, the students were supporting you, different groups were supporting you. Jewish groups, most importantly, came out in your defense and campaigned for your release. What does that mean about what you've built through communicating through communities?
I am very fortunate to have this opportunity, that I have been working on bridge building, on connecting with different people beyond the Palestinians and the pro-Palestine. And the work that I have done is a work motivated by love, by empathy, by connection, by compassion. And these all were seeds, whether I planted them 10 years ago or over the past 10 years in Vermont or over the past 4 years in New York City. So my approach was an approach that I recognize and see the value of the human life, and I don't discriminate. And I care deeply about the lives and the futures of children. And to see especially the Jewish and the Israeli community actually in Columbia University or at Columbia University and in New York City, it was heartwarming to see this wide support. And it gives me hope for the future of our humanity, that we are trying to create one standard, no double standards. We are trying to see people equal, no supremacy and no discrimination. And seeing this support has fueled my activism and my vision even further.
Mm-hmm. And that's a very powerful message. Speaking kind of beyond your echo chamber, speaking to different groups, reaching beyond the pro-Palestine crowd who are already, aware of what's happening back home in Palestine. So why do you think that you were particularly targeted, despite for speaking out so much, for striving so much for peace? Why were you targeted? Why were you detained?
I think people who don't want to see peace, and when I say peace and justice, and we can elaborate more about it, that it's difficult to have peace without addressing justice in the picture. But people who want the genocide to continue and the war to continue, they don't want my voice to be present, because they want to destroy and crash this idea that peace is possible. This is on one hand. On the other hand, I am sharing my truth. And the truth has its own forest, as Mahatma Gandhi has shared. The truth by itself has a forest to achieve justice. And the truth that I am sharing, it comes from my personal experience. You've interviewed me before during the genocide, and my pain is real. It's not something that I just feel because I see things. I have lived it. I was born as a third-generation refugee. Israel took our land, exiled my people, forced us to live in refugee camps, and my family still lives until today in a Palestinian refugee camp in the West Bank under severe conditions. And that was not it. They continued the Israeli occupation, which is now an apartheid in the West Bank. They continued attacking us. They killed a number of my family members, 6 cousins since the Second Intifada. They killed my uncle when I was a child. They killed my best friend in front of my eyes. They have destroyed places, bombed a place where I saw people shattered into pieces. And the pain that I have lived through, I transform that pain into something more beautiful by compassion and wanting to have peace. But that pain is severe for any child that lives through. If I want to share the blood that I saw in my uncle's beard when he was assassinated, killed, the smell of the blood is something you cannot forget. The shouting of mourning of my uncle's wife, who saw him dead and she was shaking him, stays with you. The pain that my grandmother lived through, she lost her vision from crying over the years. It's so serious. And the images that we see today in Gaza, the destruction of every element of life. I saw an image of a father who's carrying in a bag, a flower bag that's supposed to have flowers in it, the remaining of his child. And it reminded me of the time when I collected the remaining of people. I was 12 years old and put them in plastic bags. That is a real pain. And those people who want to silence me, they don't want me to share the truth, because the truth, it has its own power. I have first-hand experience, and my family is still suffering until today. And they don't want me to mourn. They don't want me to share the truth with the American people, who I believe to be good people, with kind-hearted people. And the moment they see the truth, they change their stand from supporting war and genocide, supporting Israel in its destruction and the continuous apartheid. And I think this is the reason.
And that's very powerful, speaking your truth. And now you're free to speak your truth. But during the time when you were hiding in place and during the time you were detained, you weren't free to do this. And we mentioned all of these communities coming out to support you. What was the kind of support that Colombia provided for you? Did they reach out during that time? Did you find support from the institution you studied at for 4 years?
The institution was very disappointing. And when I say the institution or Columbia University, I mainly mean the senior administration that was driving the decisions of the institution, not the students who I deeply love and the faculty and the staff. People know the truth, and they have been actually advocating for justice by saying we want to divest from genocide, from the apartheid, we want to divest from war. But the administrators themselves, who actually knew me and were working with me for over than a year, because my philosophy is diplomacy and empathy is what will bring restorative justice forward, not war, not cancellation, not polarization. So they knew exactly what I was working on. But when I needed them the most, they actually failed me and let me down. They refused to give me a safe place to live within the university walls. They refused to make a statement in support of me, even though they know that I have been very solid and I have been very vocal about basically opposing anti-Semitism and saying that the fight to free Palestine and the fight against anti-Semitism go hand in hand. Because as Martin Luther King has said, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So the administrators have let me down. And actually, they not only have let me down, they have let the student population down by failing to protect me, by discriminating against Palestinians and pro-Palestine, and by contributing to the destruction and deterioration of the democratic system that universities are at the center of it, and parts actually of the checks and balances of it as well.
Yeah, and the fact that Columbia University, which is supposed to be at the forefront of this, the fact that the administration failed to provide you with support gives us a lot to think about. But still, thankfully, a lot of people supported you and you managed to get out, and now you're free. And now that you've gained your freedom, you described all the pain you went through in your past when you were in Palestine. You went through so much and you were detained here in America, and now that you're free, you're still talking about a message of love and peace. And what's your plan? What do you plan to do with this message, and what do you plan to do going forwards?
There is a lot to share about this. I want to just share with you what I have realized recently. I was basically attacked. Then I was detained. Then I was released, and then I graduated from Columbia. And at every step, the community has showed up. And at every step, I stayed consistent and persistent, and I have not been shaken with my vision that the vision moving forward is through basically justice and peace and restorative justice when I say justice. So I continue to fuel my energy and my feelings, I would say, transform it and fuel this momentum that we have, a momentum to stop the genocide, to stop the war and the momentum to find a diplomatic resolution. Now, how can we achieve that? And this is part of the vision. I have written extensively about this paper that ended up to be more than 60 pages. And we held actually a retreat, peace retreat, centered around this vision last summer. And I have presented in front of the United Nations. I have presented in front of the communities, Jewish and Israeli communities that want to see peace. So how does the vision start? The first step toward justice, as I see it, starts from international law and human rights. We must restore and reform international law and human rights. And there is a war right now, and people should be aware of this. There is a war to destroy the international law, to disrespect it, and to degrade and disrespect and destroy human rights. People are doubting it because there are no mechanisms to enforce those laws and those principles. But the real issue is the double standard. And that applies on the Constitution in America, it applies on international law and human rights, that they apply to certain people and they don't apply to other groups. And the vision that we have is a vision for humanity. Because if we want to restore, we want to reform as well, to make them, functional.
So Mohsen, can you describe to us the details of the work you're doing and what impact do you see it making on the ground?
Yes. As I mentioned earlier, the vision starts from international law as a first step towards justice. Now, what does international law actually say? It says that the Palestinians have the right to have a state based on Resolution 242. That means, and that's within the boundary of 1967. So the vision that I have and I am envisioning to have for the future starts with the two-states solution. We establish that into place, and of course we have to deal with the refugee issue, which is at the core of this whole issue. Because as you know, Israel has exiled 750,000 Palestinians in 1948. That counts over 5.5 million Palestinians nowadays. And they allowed for any person, based on their religion, if they are Jewish, to come back to have, as they call it, a birthright, but they prevented the people who actually have their homes there and their lands from returning. So the right of return has to be addressed properly and can be addressed on three phases. The phase one is when we have two-state solution. During that period, there will be a lot of peace building bridges and allowing people to reestablish trust and to understand the pain and the trauma and the loss that they have experienced. The second part would be, in my imagination, would be after 5 years, where it could be a confederacy. That means confederate states, similar to the system that you would have in Europe to a certain level, where each state can give the right of citizens to the people and also allow residency, where people would apply and there would be a mutual agreement for residency where people can live in proper Israel now, or Palestine, which would be the West Bank and Gaza. And of course, there has to be connectivity between the two regions. And the third phase would be basically, of course, one of the things I did not mention is the systems in both states would be mirrored. A mirroring system that means similar structure of the governments to a certain level that would allow the path for the third phase, which is basically populations in both states, the people, the citizens, would be able to vote on referendum that happens periodically. That would ask, are you willing to have the marriage, or do you support a marriage for one country? And if we have a majority vote in both states, then we will have one country, one government, one constitution, and so on. And I envision in this a place where people can live in peace, equally, and in security as well, where the whole land between the river and the sea will be accessible. And of course, we would address the issues and we will deal with the issues of injustices that the Palestinians have faced throughout since 1948, the loss of property, the loss of people, and to find a system of reparation and paying back actually for pain and suffering. And similarly, for the Israelis who came from Europe and from other countries, the injustice has to be addressed as well, and system of reparation that has to take place, and also compromise them and pay for their pain and suffering. For the Israelis, there were countries who did that in Europe. So we just have to do it and amplify it to be a standard for everyone. And this is the way how I imagine that children who are innocent of any guilt or of any crime, children, regardless if they are Palestinians or Israelis, if you bring two children together and you don't ask them to speak and you ask who is who, you may not know. They deserve to live in peace, away from trauma, away from pain, and away from inheriting our own suffering. And that's the future that I imagine to see and that I work for seeing, because my pain as a child is the motivator to not see other children suffering the way how I suffered with loss, with pain, and with trauma.
Beautifully said, and a very comprehensive plan that starts with a two-state solution. And in that two-state solution, a sort of reparation period, a period of healing between the people, and kind of leaving it up to the people to decide if they can eventually live together in one state, and a very beautifully and intelligently laid out plan. And there's certainly so much work to be done with this, but one of the things you've mentioned is reforming the United Nations Security Council. Can you talk about that, like how the UN Security Council has 5 permanent seats and the veto power, and how that affects the resolution of so many conflicts internationally?
That's a very important point, and that's part of the international law, of course. The veto power, Israel, I think America has vetoed more than 40 resolutions proposed by the Security Council, and they have prevented actually a diplomatic political resolution to the ongoing occupation and apartheid. And if we think of it, America has a very important role to play, because if they have the veto power, they don't allow any resolution to unfold or to apply the international pressure and agreements that they are trying to bring forward. And if we look at it as well, the war is fueled by American money, justified by American politicians, and orchestrated by Americans' weapons, violating also American laws, the Leahy Law, that prevent America from doing that. So part of the vision to reform international law, that there are 2 directions. The first one, there could be a reformation about how the veto power is shared based on regional areas rather than certain countries. And the second one is actually making the General Assembly, the GA, decisions binding. And that is something that can be also resolved within the system, within the UN system.
And this is very inspiring to hear about. After all you've been through, and you've come out on the other side, and you're campaigning to make these reforms, to bring a systemic change. And while you're campaigning like this, you've mentioned your conversations with Israelis. Can you describe how those conversations have been when you're speaking directly to people, Jewish people or people from Israel?
As I mentioned before, the truth has a great power, a power to shift people's minds, to shift people's hearts, and to bring about a difference, a change. So my conversations with Israelis, in fact, most of the Israelis who I've worked with, they did not actually, they are not aware of the violations that Israel have done. Actually, some were not aware of the Nakba itself because they were told lies. And the other part is, I feel so much empathy for Israelis because they get indoctrinated and brainwashed to a certain level. When you take somebody who's 18 years old, you put them in the army, and you make them actually, and to act, you give them agency to be oppressors. What else would they know? So there is this isolation between the reality that the Palestinian people are going through and the way how the Israeli people, generally speaking, are able to see it. And this is something I discovered like shortly after arriving in America, because I discovered that if there is an enemy, I said the enemy would be segregation, fear, and ignorance. And when we look at the Palestinian-Israeli issue, I see it as there are root causes of the issue. What led to the creation of Israel is the deep level of trauma and pain that the Jewish people have faced in Europe. You're talking about a genocide, the Holocaust. More than 6 million people were killed. That leaves a deep, deep psychological scar. And what causes the pain that the Palestinians have been going through since 1948 and a little bit before that is the creation of Israel. That is the accusation. And as Edward Said said, we cannot actually envision a resolution for the Palestinian-Israeli issue in isolation from looking at the Jewish issue as a whole. So all of this pain that we are seeing, as painful as it is, as shocking as it is, as horrible as it is calling for healing. And healing has to be at the center of any peace process and any vision.
And how do you find that power of kind of healing, empathy, empathizing with Israelis, despite all the painful things you went through, witnessing your best friend die, your cousins, your uncles? How do you come out on the other end with empathy and love and a vision for peace?
So empathy is a term that's a bit complicated. To empathize with somebody is to try to understand what makes them act this way. It's easy for us to dehumanize others. It's easy for us to say they are bad people. But it's more difficult to understand what is causing them to do that. I believe in my heart that the human nature is a good nature. And when do you know that? You know that when you meet with people around dining tables, when you start asking them about their aspiration and hope, when you see a mother caring for her child, and when you see a child loving their parents and their siblings. And as we know, when a child goes through a trauma, they may take the whole life without being able to heal that trauma. And when a parent loses their child, there is no other pain like it because it's against the natural order. So what we have to do, I open my heart and I say, I have pain. I don't say, you have caused this pain. Say, I am inviting you to look at my pain. I am inviting you to see me as a human, to hear me as a human, and from this to decide if you want me to continue to live this pain, in this pain. Of course, there is a lot of, layers that they tried to complicate this issue, but the human connection is way stronger than all of these layers and intellectualizing the problem.
That's certainly so inspiring to hear coming from you. And with all the work you're doing, with everything that's going on in the world, where do you see things headed in the future? And do you still have a hopeful vision for what's to come?
I am very hopeful, in fact, and I am sharing this also to my fellow Palestinians who are in pain and are unable to see the light. The Palestinian cause and the Palestinian issue has never had this much of coverage since basically our Nakba, since the disaster in 1948. So the world is aware of the Palestinian issue. If you hold the Palestinian flag, a child in America or in any other country would recognize the Palestinian flag. If you have a kufiya, any person around the world will recognize the kufiya. And this, what is it telling me? That people are aware, and they're aware that there is an issue, and most people are standing up for justice and against the killing of children and women, against the genocide. So the hope that I have, that we can end this war and bring a diplomatic resolution without the use of force. And we can do that because the financial mean, the divestment and boycott and sanctions can actually dry any community. If those means are applied for now to any entity that is supporting and furthering the genocide in Gaza, and any entity that is supporting and furthering the apartheid and the settler colonial project that's ongoing in the West Bank, I bet you in a matter of a year, this will end. And that's the power that universities are trying to bring. It's a political power to say, divest from war, boycott any entity that is supporting the war and furthering the genocide, and it's refusing to abide by human rights and international law. So I'm very optimistic because more and more people are tired of this, and more people are seeing the issue for what it is, the oppression, the occupation, the discrimination, and the system of supremacy that is actually endangering everybody else. And some people think it's only about Palestine. I don't think it's only about Palestine. I think it's about the future of our humanity, because we know that Taiwan is in danger. We know that Ukraine is in danger. We know that the Sudan is in danger. We know that Iran is in danger. We know that our world is in danger. And wars and nuclear weapons and destruction is not the answer. We have to come together to resolve this, and to resolve it out of looking at the standard, which is justice, nonviolence, empathy, and compassion.
Wow, and a very strong message to share with the world. Thank you so much, Mohsen, again, for having us here. Thank you so much for sharing your message of peace.
It's a great honor. Thank you for allowing me to share my voice, and thank you for carrying my message to the rest of the world.
It's our pleasure.